You are listening to WRFG Atlanta. WRFG provides a voice for those who have been traditionally denied open access to the broadcast media through the involvement of a broad base of community elements to guarantee that access. In the utilization of the facilities and its programs, the following communities will receive first priority: those who continue to be denied free and open access to the broadcast media, and those who suffer oppression or exploitation based upon class, race, sex, age, creed, disability, sexual orientation, or immigrant status.
My name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace. I'm here with co-producer Ernest Dunkley, and this evening we're going to be talking with investigative journalist Greg Palast and Ray McClendon of the NAACP about the Georgia runoff elections on January the 5th. Before I go any further, I want you to know that the opinions expressed on Just Peace do not necessarily reflect those of Radio Free Georgia Broadcasting Foundation, Incorporated, its board, staff, or volunteers. First, we'll be talking with Greg Palast, who is known for his investigative reports for Democracy Now!, where this week he reported on the Black Voters Matter suit against Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, for illegally purging 198,000 voters from the voter rolls before this year's elections. You can catch his reports at gregpalast.com. Welcome, Greg Palast. It's such a treat to have you on our program yet again. Tell us what you are doing or what's happening as far as folks getting re-registered.
We put in a request, a demand that the court order the counting of provisional ballots. So if you walk in and you're told you're no longer on the voter rolls, they're supposed to give you a provisional ballot. But by the way, if you get a provisional ballot and you're not on the voter rolls, that ballot does not count, period. Without a court order, that ballot cannot count. There's no curing, as they call it in your state. You can't cure a provisional ballot if you're removed because you're not registered. So we went to the federal court to get those ballots counted. It looks like it won't be needed. And again, it's not about whether we want to put Ossoff into the Senate. It was about we want to let the voters make that choice, not Raffensperger's Jim Crow Jim Crow trickery.
Are you there, Greg?
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, okay.
And I'm still Greg.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
But the thing is, you have now filed 3 lawsuits against the state of Georgia, right? Or Raffensperger.
Yes. The same thing. Yes. In his official post.
Right.
We filed many. Actually, we filed against Brian Kemp in his official capacity, then Raffensperger. We won our first suit back in February of last year.
Oh, okay.
When he tried to hide.
What happened with that? What happened with that?
With that, Kemp and then Raffensperger tried to hide their secret little, disgusting little contacts with Trump's Purgeon general, a guy named Chris Kobach of Kansas. If you can't remember the name, just think KKK. Chris Kobach of Kansas is the guy who came up with some of those evil methods of eliminating voters of color from the voter rolls, like his interstate cross-check system, which Kemp participated in. That's another lie to the court. They said that they didn't, and they did. We caught them. The judge didn't believe them for a minute. We won that case. In fact, I'm happy to say he had to pay our lawyers.
Wow.
But beyond that, we still had a way to go. Once we opened the files and got the information on the wrongly purged voters, we got to get them back on. Right now, they're under a directive from the federal court to go and meet with LaTosha Brown of Black Voters Matter, with myself, with our experts, and they haven't done it to straighten out what the judge identified. Even though he lied to them, he didn't understand. The judge, what can he do? They say that they went to these official post office licensees, checked with the post office. We said we did, but the lists don't match. How could that be? And it's not like we're 198 off. We're 198,000 off, right? So the judge said, you better sit down and figure out these discrepancies. Well, they literally hid from us to avoid sitting down, getting the list straightened out, getting these people back on before the runoff. And in fact, if you go to Democracy Now! Or you go to gregpalast.com, GREGPALAST, go to gregpalast.com, and you'll see a film of me and LaTosha Brown and Gerald Griggs and C.K. Hoeffler and Barbara Arnwine, by the way, with all these cameras following us from CNN, et cetera, going up to Raffensperger's office. It's a week before the election, a week and a half before the election, the runoff, to have our meeting to get these people put back on the rolls. He's been ducking us. So we went to his office. We go to his office, which is, if you've been in the state capitol, his office is directly across from Brian Kemp's. He'd closed the door, turned off the lights, closed the shutters, locked the door. I kid you not, hiding, and left a little phone number on the outside of the door, which went to nowhere. So then Latasha Brown said, I think I know where they might be. So we ran off to the what you call your Twin Towers there in the Capitol. And sure enough, there was your director of elections, a little weasel named Chris Harvey, and your director of elections, or elections theft, I should say. Harvey, so he comes out, and Latasha Brown says, okay, are you going to have a meeting with us? The judge asked you to have a meeting with us. When are we having this meeting? Oh, we'll get back to you. She says, look, we don't want to get run around the block. She was very, very polite. She wasn't like being nasty or being, we were being very, she's, if you know Latasha, she can be very super polite and but firm. She says, I don't want to get run around the block. I want a meeting. So, of course, he gives her the run around the block. But then I step in and say, now, look, we have names of people who you said have moved, like Ishtar Diaz, Christine Jordan, others. Will you put them back on the voter rolls, please? They're still, we can show you we can show you that the post office says that they haven't moved. And I have videotape of them in the houses that you said that they moved out of. You took away their votes. You want to put them back on the voter rolls? He says, well, I'll take their names. I said, no, I didn't ask you if you'll take their names. You already took their names off. You have their names. I want you to put them back on. Are you going to put them back on when you see this proof that they still live there? He says, well, I'll take their names. I said, well, wait, we have 198,000 names. So we gave him the entire list, by the way. Still hasn't met with us. So we're waiting. So now we're going to have a trial. Just so you know, we're going to have a trial.
Oh, when will that be, Greg?
We don't know because, we're still going through all the preliminary stuff. I mean, I know what they're going to try to do. They're going to try, some of these federal trials can take 3, 4, 5 years.
I see.
So what we're hoping is to have the trial before the next election. So by next year, we'd like to get these folks back on. Now, we've got a lot of them back on already through direct methods. People themselves do get put themselves back on. I mean, one of the tragedies is we had one woman that I filmed who had gone in November and, her name was missing. So they handed her a provisional ballot and she filled it out. What she didn't know is that the ballot wasn't counted. Even worse, that a lot of people given provisional ballots now think, oh, there was a temporary problem. It's straightened out, or I filled this out and now I'm registered. There's no problem anymore. They don't realize that they're still purged from the voter rolls. So we need to get people back on. And I tell this to everyone, by the way, listening. The best thing to do, and you should do it every time. I do. A lot of people do. A lot of people listen to my words. I'm going to say it again. Check your registration. At least, especially in Georgia, 2 months before any election, go to the Secretary of State's website and see if you are still registered. And also see how your name is spelt. See whether they have the right because you have your insane, quote, exact match system in Georgia, where if your name isn't exactly matched on your various records, you can't vote. So make sure the address, the name is correct, and that you're listed as an active voter.
Greg, listen, what I don't understand here, this is an illegal action on the part of the Secretary of State, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, completely.
Okay, hypothetically, if there's a trial, and they are prosecuted for this or found guilty, then what are the consequences for that? Do they go to jail?
Nothing. Well, the only this is one thing we really have to begin to address. And while Biden's put in a complete weakling as Attorney General, I'm hoping that our pressure, so we have to keep the pressure up. He's put in this, Merrick Garland guy. He rejected Doug Jones. Who knows the politics of that? But all I'm telling you is you got to keep the pressure on the Justice Department, because it is not only a violation of law. Once Raffensperger knew that Brian Kemp had given him a poisoned list and a poisoned system, it was his obligation to fix it. And the truth is, it's not only a violation of civil law, but there is a violation of criminal law. And by the way, there's also, for Georgia, a penalty, which right now you don't want. The penalty is that you lose electoral votes.
Oh, yeah.
And which would be pretty ironic, right? No, but any official that participates in blocking voters of color from voting. That's a criminal violation of the Voting Rights Act. I'm less concerned about any personal liability for Raffensperger. I would also like to see the state take efforts to not only fix the system of purging, but, you had the stuff that went on in Georgia. I mean, it was like 1956. It's amazing that Warnock and Ossoff pulled this off. It may seem like a close race, but if everyone got to vote and every vote counted, it wouldn't have been a close race. I mean, I was in Cobb County, while I've focused on the purging of the voter rolls. And by the way, if I wrote a quite a elaborate report, which was issued by the ACLU of Georgia. Thank you to the ACLU for putting out my report on these illegal purges. But beyond the purges, I was in Cobb County, where I think many of you who listen to RFG know that there were 11 early polling stations in the general election. And when Biden swept Cobb County, which is pretty amazing given that this is Newt Gingrich land, the Republican Board of Elections closed 6 of the 11 polling stations. All 6 were closed in black neighborhoods.
But that's illegal too, isn't it? Isn't that illegal?
Well, again, yes, it's against, by the way, it's not only against federal law. It is against the Voting Rights Act, but it's also against Georgia law. Georgia law is quite explicit. You have to have the same number of polling stations in a runoff as you do in a general election. And they close them. They say, oh, COVID. Well, what is COVID? What about, because they didn't have supposedly enough workers to man the stations? Well, excuse me. If you didn't have enough workers to man the stations, why did you only close the polling stations in the black areas, not in the white areas?
Exactly.
That's number one. And number two, I do know that the ACLU is running a program to provide poll workers where they were needed.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Peace and blessings. Please allow me to take a brief moment to introduce myself. My name is Aisha Hardiman, and I am the news station manager at WRFG 89.3 FM. I would like to usher in this new season by thanking you for your continued support. For 47 years, WRFG has stayed committed to bringing you progressive news, information, and music both locally and from around the world, and this will not change. As we enter a new year, we do so with confidence. 2020 challenged us in ways that we could have never imagined, but WRFG remained on the air, and we did that with your help. So I ask you, please take this time to visit WRFG.org to make your 2021 contribution today. I must send a special thank you to Joan Baptist for 20 amazing years of service. You will truly be missed. And as we move forward toward our goal of building an even stronger organization, we thank you for the many years you have given to this community. Much love, and I wish you all a happy new year.
Again, we are returning to the interview with Greg Palast.
Then Georgia, by the way, you only need to be 16 years old to be a poll worker, and you get a couple $100 a day. So I'm telling young people, hey, become poll workers. Pick up a couple $100 and you save Georgia. How about that?
Greg, what happens now as far as the case is concerned? You're saying that there will be a trial. When will that be?
Yes, we don't know. We have to go through literally the motions, the legal motions, as you know, and we have to go through discovery. I want to find out why and how the state lied to the court. Got to nail that down, and we want to expose that. Of course, by the way, where's the Atlanta Journal-Constitution? I mean, didn't you once have a newspaper in Atlanta?
Well, yes, that's right.
Mean, by the way, the New York Times covered it, and of course, Democracy Now! and WRFG, but there's really no coverage from your local paper. They will not, unless it slams them in the face. So we're taking on a lot of things. And by the way, one of the other things they're doing, while Georgia, of course, is extremely important.
Right.
And as you know, I have worked with Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight when they were a total nonpartisan nonprofit. It was Stacey Abrams' organization that paid for our experts to review the lists with the post office. I mean, a lot of that is really complicated and quite expensive. But weirdly, it's the job of the state. It's not the job of Greg Palast. It's not the job of the ACLU. It's not the job of Fair Fight Georgia. It's the job of the state to do this. But we had to do it, and so we'll continue. But I'm also interested in all the other Jim Crow tactics in Georgia. But I will say that it's not like Georgia is alone and unusual. Georgia is the testing ground for the GOP's Jim Crow tactics.
So, what do you mean? Well, Georgia is a testing ground for other states as well.
Well,
is that what you're saying?
This purge system, the use it or lose it, they call it, but it's about moving, whether you've moved from your address. These things are first tested out in Georgia. Interstate cross-check, a system where they said, if someone's voting in 2 states, tested in Georgia. Now, remember, everyone's talking about Raffensperger as this great hero. He ain't a great hero. He's nothing close to a great hero, okay? He just, that at a certain point, he couldn't steal enough votes for Trump. And he wasn't going to go to prison for Trump because he knows that Greg Palast and Latasha Brown and Gerald Griggs and the NAACP are watching him. He's more watched than any other Secretary of State in America. And at a certain point, he will end up in prison. And if I have something to do with it, I'll make sure.
Oh, really?
He's already crossed the line, in my opinion. But, Trump wanted him to go further than way beyond any reasonable. He wanted to do a daylight robbery with no mask on, of course. Yeah. And that wasn't going to happen. But for example, CNN, they didn't mean to cover our story, but CNN and C-SPAN did broadcast nationally when you got this guy Sterling, I think Gene Sterling's name, you're from Secretary of State's flunky. Now, I feel bad for him in one way. The Trumpites are trying to kill him because he doesn't steal enough votes. But I asked him on national broadcasts, by the way, as a reporter for Pacifica, I asked him, listen, federal court has told you to meet with Latasha Brown of Black Voters Matter. When are you going to do that? When are you going to return these illegally purged voters back to the voter rolls? And he ran. He literally ran. The cameras are covering him, literally running from the microphone. It's ridiculous. It's a comedy. It's just like when we caught this, when they locked the doors on us. You got a bunch of dangerous Jim Crow clowns in Georgia. There's no other way to put it. And so what's very, very important when people think of offices, I don't know if you know the broadcaster Raheem Shabazz in Atlanta. And he said, until I lost my vote, I never thought about offices like Secretary of State. And this is one thing progressives have got to learn about. It's called voting down ballot. You can't just vote for president. You can't even just vote for senator. You got to know all the offices. Secretary of State is the person who decides whether you get to vote, where the votes are done, whether the votes get counted. Just like I thought it was one race I was following very closely besides the Senate race was your Public Service Commission race. And Bubba, your GOP Public Service Commissioner, despite Ossoff and Warnock winning, the Republican won for Public Service Commission.
Yeah.
Which meant that a lot of people voted Warnock, Ossoff, and then walked out of the voting booth or didn't, when they mailed in, they didn't add that. They didn't bother. They simply didn't bother to check the box on that line. Now, what's the consequence of that? The consequence of that, my friends, is that unless something radically changes, you guys are going to be paying for that Georgia Power piece of hot junk called the New Vogtle nuclear plant. You know that there's been over $20 billion spent on that useless piece of junk, which is not even half built. And this is what the Public Service Commission does. So you got to be aware of these offices like Secretary of State, Public Service Commission. And this is true nationwide. And I want to say that's the other thing. When I say they take these things, Jim Crow tactics for test drive in Georgia, they then go out to other states. This is in Ohio, in North Carolina, in Michigan, in Wisconsin. Now, I have to tell you, in Wisconsin, when we brought our case and we did our investigation, the Wisconsin Board of Elections, unlike Brad Raffensperger, who had no problem keeping these voters off the voter rolls, these voters of color off the voter rolls, even though we handed them the names. We showed them photos of them in their houses that they haven't moved from. Photos, okay? Still won't return them to the voter rolls. But when we took we did the same investigation in Wisconsin, a false purge organized by the Republican legislature in Wisconsin, the bipartisan elections board refused to remove these voters from the voter rolls. They protected the voters. And this is a bipartisan board in Wisconsin. But this stuff is taken for a test drive in Georgia again and again because you are a swing state. As Martin Luther King III told me back in 2014, he said, Greg, Georgia's a blue state if they let us vote. And again, it's not that I'm not trying to turn Georgia blue. It is blue. It's a question of whether there is a blackout of black voters and voters of color. And by the way, two particular groups that people forget that our targets are Asian American voters and Hispanic voters, which are viciously purged and blocked from voting, and young voters. One young voter I know had a hellacious time voting, my daughter in Savannah.
So let me ask you about the Asian voters, for example. What indication do you have about that, or what proof do you have of that?
Oh my God, the Asian American voters really got slammed back in 2016 and 2018. I was reporting for Rolling Stone in 2016 and Salon in 2018. And in 2016, there was a group, 1,000 Koreans vote. In the 17, and by the way, they're based in where Ossoff originally ran in the 6th Congressional District up there near Roswell. And to have 10,000 Koreans vote, it's a group they have to register 10,000 Korean Americans. And they were successfully registering thousands. They sent the names in to Brian Kemp, then Secretary of State, but they weren't appearing on the voter rolls. So 10,000 Koreans vote. Helen Ho, who was the head of the organization, called the Secretary of State's office. Said, "Where's our voters?" They said, "Well, no, we don't have these registration forms." He says, "Oh, yeah, I know you do. We know because we photocopied them to make sure that, we had a record." Well, then the Georgia Bureau of Investigation went to the 10,000 Korean votes office, kicked in the doors, took the computers, and threatened everyone with criminal felony charges of tampering with the vote. This is for photocopying registration forms to prevent the real tampering of the vote. Brian Kemp's refusal to put Asian American voters on the voter rolls. Brian Kemp committed an absolute stone cold federal crime as Secretary of State, refusing to put Asian Americans on the voter rolls.
So, Greg, what's happened with that?
What's happened? I think he became governor. That's how he became governor, by removing these voters. Asian Americans vote. If you watch by the way, I made a film about it called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, which is centered in Georgia. You can, by the way, download that at gregpalast.com. You can now get a freeload download of The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Just go to gregpalast.com. And even though it's centered on the 2016 election and how Trump stole that election, we have a lot about Georgia, including, and we love it, it's one of the only place where you will see a film of John Lewis dancing Gangnam Style, because a young bunch of Korean American voters did a little video, which we used called Voting Gangnam Style. And there was John Lewis. And it underscored the point that scared the hell out of Brian Kemp. You know why? Because he realized that Asian American voters who used to vote in the majority Republican, including the Muslim American vote, was majority Republican, remember. And now the Asian American vote, almost identical to the black vote, about 75% of Asian Americans vote Democratic. So they are panicked about the new, especially the young Asian American vote, which is the fastest rising demographic in Georgia is the Asian American vote. And they have to stop it. The only way they can stop it is by refusing to put Asian Americans on the voter rolls and by threatening criminal charges. By the way, they dropped all these criminal charges for photocopying registration forms. That was nuts. They tried that, by the way, with Stacey Abrams when she was head of New Georgia Project. But she had long years of experience fighting this type of tactic, and she fought back. But the Asian American group, 10,000 Korean votes, effectively ceased to function.
How was it for this election?
Well, this election, you have Raffensperger. He wasn't as gross and as awful as Brian Kemp.
Okay.
But he continued the Kemp games. That's the thing. First of all, remember, Raffensperger is kind of a nebbish. He's a nothing. But he's a vicious nothing. Don't forget when people say, "Oh, he told Donald Trump that there's no fraudulent voters," but that's not what he said in public. That's not what that little scamp said in public. I would like to remind you that Raffensperger, because go to gregpalast.com, see the film that we just did for Democracy Now! Last week, and what you'll see, or this past week, what you will see is Brad Raffensperger, your Secretary of State, out at a press conference announcing that there were 1,000 voters in the primaries who voted twice. Do you know that none of your lazy reporters of Georgia, not once, ever said to him in the 2 months since, 3 months since now. Hey, Brad, you said 1,000 people voted twice, which is a crime. Name one. And how many did you arrest? I can tell you this. He can't name one because he arrested none. Not one. It was complete phony, this whole business of fraudulent voters. And then when people say, where does Donald Trump get this crazy idea of fraudulent voters? Brad Raffensperger. That's where he got it from. One thing I want to do, anyone who says that Brad Raffensperger stood up to Donald Trump, that's false. In the end, it was only when Trump was literally telling his band of crazy and egging them on to actually cause physical harm to this man that he suddenly realized that his buddies that he was stealing elections for were actually could kill him. That doesn't make him a hero. I'm sorry, it doesn't make him a hero. Just because Donald Trump's crazies want to kill you, I'm sympathetic. And my God, I don't blame him for being half in hiding. But that doesn't make you a hero, buddy. Not when you're running a Jim Crow operation. Sorry.
Wow. All right, Greg. Well, I guess we're going to have to end this discussion or this interview with you, or your comments about what happened in the election. So, as Dr. King would say, where do we go from here?
Well, that's a good one. Number one, you got a good lesson about how Jim Crow operates, is that you can't steal all the votes all the time. The massive turnout overwhelmed the steal. You can't steal all the votes all the time. In fact, we have a pretty good calculation of these things. It runs, depending on the state, from 3 to 6% steal. And that's the margin in most races, as you know. If they push a little harder, you would not have the current senators you've elected, and you wouldn't have Joe Biden as president. So you can overwhelm the steal. That's the number one thing. The second thing is don't go to sleep. After the 2008 election, when Obama was elected, you ended up with a black president and everyone went to sleep. Oh, there's no more Jim Crow. We celebrate Martin Luther King Day. We got a black president. And the issue of vote suppression just disappeared. And then you paid for it. America paid for it in 2016. And Georgia paid for it in 2018. And that's why you have to applaud people. It's not just Stacey. Stacey Abrams become the national celebrity, which she deserves. But, you're about to talk to a gentleman from the NAACP, and they've been on the front lines. Gerald Griggs, people like that, been on the front lines fighting and not stopping. That's why you had a new president. That's why you have 2 new senators, is because you had groups in Georgia, more than any other state. Georgia, while it has some of the worst Jim Crow tactics, it also has the absolute most activated, smart, experienced voting rights organizations anywhere in America. Nothing like it. Georgia is the absolute leader in voting rights action. I hope that not only Jim Crow tactics, but I hope that other states in America pick up what happened in Georgia, which is about staying vigilant, staying on top of it, not letting your guard down. You got 2 new senators. That don't mean nothing. In 2 years, Warnock runs again. Brian Kemp runs again. Or I don't know if Brian Kemp's going to run again. He's roadkill. But you're going to have another race. 2 more, Senate and governor. And I'm not saying who you should vote for. I'm just saying you better protect your vote.
Well, Greg Palast, as always, thanks so much for sharing all this and for your great work.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
You're listening to Just Peace on WRFG in Atlanta, and we are now going to be talking with Ray McClendon of the Atlanta NAACP about the Georgia elections. Tell us your position at the NAACP, Ray, please.
Hello, how are you? I am the political action chairman for the NAACP and a part of the coalition that worked across the state of Georgia over the general election and, of course, the runoffs here that produced some dramatic result.
Yes, well, thank you for that. I know the NAACP, you all were just incredibly busy for this election in 2021, right? I mean, just all over the state.
Absolutely. It was a great coming together, a great collaboration that occurred. And as you well know, Heather, this was not an overnight success.
Right.
This success occurred over many, many years. Like some of the good folks that you know in Southwest Georgia who've been working on get out the vote, voter engagement issues for a decade, along with North Georgia and Metro Atlanta groups that have been operating in this area. And what we found is, especially coming out of the 2016 elections, that we were all involved in this, but we were not collaborating to the maximum extent possible. And therefore, we weren't as efficient and as effective as we should be. And so what you've seen over the last 2 months from the general election to the runoff is really the culmination of the hard work, the collaboration, the communication amongst a number of different groups across this entire state to generate the highest turnout of Black voters since the Obama election.
Oh, is that right? So you've so these are statistics that you have, Ray? Is that correct? Or
we're waiting on the final statistics, but it's been documented from the early information that we have is that particularly in South Georgia and along the Black Belt in South Georgia, we were able to garner almost 90% of the vote in the runoffs that we had in the general election. And we know that the general election was a major turnout. So we're waiting to get the final stats, but it is clear from all of the evidence that we have so far that the Black vote made a significant difference, and that the level of turnout from the general election to the runoff election was unprecedented.
You know, I want to ask you, and also if Ernest or Briar would like to comment about this as well. But the thing is, for this election, there was just so much media attention to the importance of this election, actually, about these two senators and the control of the Senate and so forth. And I know that the NAACP is nonpartisan and so forth. Your work is just to encourage folks to go to the polls. But I'm thinking that all of this media attention must have also had some remarkable influence on encouraging people to go to the polls. Do you think that, Ray?
I think to some extent that's true. But the bigger issue is that our voters are becoming more and more informed and educated on how vital their voices are. And what you saw here, more so than what happened with broadcast ads and the information gathered from TV, it was really the efforts of grassroots organizations and the ground game where people went door to door, church to church, house to house, and made a difference in letting people understand how important this particular set of races were and how valuable their votes were, and explain to people that even if you don't understand specifically how important it may be, this is the way to express your voice for whatever issues you have in your life. This is the way that we're going to make that difference and be heard. And I think that's what resonated. There's a difference between the type of broadcast shotgun approach that many situations use compared to the specific relational target approach that we were able to use across the state of Georgia in the Black community. And I think that is what made the difference.
Well, what about also the role of Stacey Abrams in all of this as well? Was the NAACP working closely with her also?
We've worked with Stacey Abrams, but more importantly, we've worked with all of the key groups that are leaders in the Black community across the state. I mean, as you well know, there are some fundamental groups that represent the Black leadership in every town, from Atlanta, Decatur, but also to Albany, Georgia, Coffee County, Lowndes County, Valdosta, to Chatham County, Liberty County, Savannah, etc. And what I mean by that is, in the Black community, whether it's the Black church, the Divine Nine, which are all of the Black fraternities and sororities, the Prince Hall Masons and Eastern Stars, the 100 Black Men, 100 Coalition of 100 Black Women. All of those organizations in any town in Georgia and indeed in the South, the leaders of those communities, Black communities, are going to come out of those particular groups. So what we decided was that if we want to encourage and engage Black voters, inform Black voters, we have to go to people who have relationships with those Black voters, and those relationships will come from those groups who are the leaders in those communities. That's what grassroots and a ground game is all about. And so that's what we started. We really started putting this coalition together after the Stacey Abrams race for governor in 2018. And we vowed after that we were never going to get caught short where we were not talking to each other, collaborating and communicating with each other so that we would be as efficient and as effective as possible across the entire state.
Oh, that's excellent. So it's going to be quite a collaborative effort that we're going to be seeing now and in the future, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. And again, this is not an overnight success. Like I said, we know, as you are well aware of, that there are groups like the Southwest Georgia Project that have been out here for a decade. We've been at this now, making changes, figuring out who key organizations were and how we could consolidate and collaborate with one another over the last 6-7 years. And so this is the culmination of that for the 2020 general election, and then, of course, the runoff. So now what we're saying is we see how to be successful. We see how to be effective and efficient. I'll give you a quick anecdote here. You know, back in 2016, we would be out doing voter registration. And we would have a voter registration drive, and we might be in a Walmart parking lot somewhere doing voter registration, or in a strip shopping center. And the NAACP would be on one corner. The AKA's Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority would be on another corner. The Omega Psi Phi fraternity would be on another. And so we would all be out trying to register maybe 20 or 25 folks on a Saturday afternoon. And we said, why are we doing this? We should communicate with one another so that we can say that this group will cover that particular shopping center. Another group can be deployed to another location. We'll be more effective. When we have phone banking and text banking, let's make sure that we're all understanding the targeted voters that we want to go after. And let's all work off of platforms where we know that we're going after the low propensity and moderate propensity voters that we need to encourage to get out, and not waste time on those super voters from our communities that we know very well. There's a whole group of voters that we know have not missed voting in the last 20 years. And they got 10 phone calls, 5 texts, and 5 or 6 postcards. Why did they get that? Because we were not culling lists, filtering, and getting to the real focus of who we should be trying to turn out. Well, those things changed coming into 2020, and we were able to be much more, that's what I mean when I say efficient and effective, because we were all working together and saying, although we might be on different platforms in different parts of the state, everybody will know what everybody else is doing so that we don't have to duplicate our efforts and create unnecessary redundancies.
Oh, that's smart. And it's worked.
Well, we're grateful because people were not concerned about who got the credit.
Yeah,
and so
that's
I
good.
think
That's
I
good.
thank
That
God
makes
for that. And you mentioned Stacey, and Stacey Abrams did an amazing job. But I'll tell you, there are people like Shirley Sherrod, who you know very well and have worked with, who's been at this for so many years and is an icon in her own right. We respect all of the work that she was doing and what that made. So It's what difference that made. So it was a matter of so many people from Black Voters Matter and Latasha and how significant her work was. Marvin Nunnally, who is a key leader of the NAACP, Prince Hall Masons, and also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi and the Divine Nine, that put on major rallies over in Athens, Clark County. We've got people like that all over the state who are holding prayer vigils and putting on events and doing major effort. And then I can't forget Richard Rose, the president of the NAACP Atlanta, who initially came up with the concept that we would put together this coalition of 19 counties and then join forces with all of these other groups and have weekly meetings so that we could have the kinds of conversations that would ensure that we would be more efficient and effective because of our communication. So those are the things that have occurred in 2020 and early 2021. And what we've decided is we're not going to stop now, because there are forces that are still at work that saw our success. They're frustrated by our success, and they're going to work even harder to continue to try to disenfranchise Black and brown voters. And so we've got to redouble our efforts to work 365 days a year to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Wow, good for you. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Peace and blessings. Please allow me to take a brief moment to introduce myself. My name is Aisha Hardiman, and I am the new station manager at WRFG 89.3 FM. I would like to usher in this new season by thanking you for your continued support. For 47 years, WRFG has stayed committed to bringing you progressive news, information, and music both locally and from around the world, and this will not change. As we enter a new year, we do so with confidence. 2020 challenged us in ways that we could have never imagined, but WRFG remained on the air, and we did that with your help. So I ask you, please take this time to visit WRFG.org to make your 2021 contribution today. I must send a special thank you to Joan Baptist for 20 amazing years of service. You will truly be missed. And as we move forward toward our goal of building an even stronger organization, we thank you for the many years you have given to this community. Much love, and I wish you all a happy new year.
Again, we're returning to the interview with Ray McClendon of the Atlanta NAACP. So I'm just going to ask Ernest, do you have a question or comment you'd like to make?
Well, I wonder who's going to video this, who's going to film this project, because what has transpired needs to be recorded.
Archived, yeah, right.
It needs to be recorded right now, because this is a fantastic point in history where we actually have cooperation going on like that in a broad sense across many lines. In Africa, we would have said many tribes that are all related. And this is a very galvanizing time in history. I think it'll go down as that. And I would love to be a part of doing the documentary of what transpired over the last 2 months. Just what has just been relayed to us, this information as it is a fantastic documentary that needs to be done, which acts as a fantastic teaching tool.
No doubt about it. I totally agree with that assessment. And what we need to do is understand that first, as the brother said, we need to document this, and then we need to take it on the road. Because there's no reason that Jamie Harrison, who ran for Senate after raising over $100 million in South Carolina, should have lost. Okay? There's no reason that we should have had disappointments that we had in North Carolina. And so what we need to do is take this on the road, not to pat ourselves on the back, but to say, hey, are you doing all you can, not to worry about credit, but to use some techniques that we know can work and then improve upon them.
That's great.
And count me in, please. Count me in.
I want you to know, Ernest is talking about it on the Africa. So he lived close to 20 years in Nigeria, actually, as a journalist, largely, and educating people about journalism. Right, Ernest?
Fantastic.
Filmmaker.
Filmmaker, thank you.
Filmmaker, journalist, yes.
Filmmaker, journalist. So, but Ray, I want to ask you just your opinion about what happened in Washington on January the 6th.
What happened was it was insurrection against the United States perpetrated by the President of the United States. It was a clear and present danger by domestic terrorists and white supremacists, and laid bare the problem of white supremacy as an existential threat to America that has not been dealt with in this nation's history, that has been excused for and put beyond a veil, and now the veil has been pulled back for all the world to see. And so what we need to do is call it what it is. It is white supremacy and white privilege that went into our capital that had not been desecrated to this level since the War of 1812 by the British. It is nothing less than that.
Right.
Now, but here's the hope. There's hope that comes out of this situation, and it is that we need to start standing up and calling it what it is. We don't need to allow people to challenge us from the standpoint, why do you always keep talking about racism? Why do you keep talking about systemic racism? Why does everything always have to be about race? It has to be about races because you've never had a reckoning in the 200 and almost 50 years of American history on race, on the history of this country on race. That's what happened on the 6th. And we would be even worse off. We would be even worse off, and there would be much less hope if we hadn't done in Georgia what we did just the day before, when we elected a Black man who grew up in the projects, along with a Jewish man who was the descendant of Jewish immigrants, and elected both of them to the Senate on the same day, that then allows for some of this tyranny to be put in check. And that all came out of what we've been talking about, which is the re-enfranchisement as opposed to the disenfranchisement of Black voters, so that our voices can be heard and we don't get frustrated and opt out, which creates more polarization and ultimately leads to the demise. Black people are helping to save democracy. Those folks that were there in DC on the 6th are trying to destroy democracy. And with our blood, sweat, and tears that we have laid bare for 400 years, we have as many rights to democracy as anybody based upon the investment we've made. We showed it on Tuesday. We've got to continue that, and we can overcome the tyranny that occurred on January 6th. But we've got to organize, collaborate, and communicate and use the model that we created, because what they are scared of is that our votes are our voice, and therefore they want to deny that voice, and they want to try to put that genie back in the bottle, and it's just not going to happen if we just keep our eye on the prize.
Well, Ray McClendon, I want to thank you so much for this interview today. And thank you also for your great work. It's so appreciated. We're looking forward to as Ernest, and I know Briar would agree as well. We're looking forward to learning more about what you're doing in the upcoming months and years, actually, in this collaboration effort. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
So actually, Ray, I would just before we leave, I just wanted to say what I'd like to do is for us to have periodic interviews with you to get an update on what's happened with the NAACP.
Sure. Yeah, it starts next week. It starts next week. Well, what I mean by the fact that it starts next week is that the state Senate in Georgia is preparing to introduce legislation to substantially curtail no excuse absentee ballot in Georgia. Why? They introduced it, passed it in 2005. It's been fined for 15 years. Why are they doing this now? Because Black people took advantage of it. And the major, we know that in absentee balloting, Black folks and the people of color and progressives outperformed more conservative people during the absentee ballot period, and therefore they want to curtail it. So they are going to employ some new voter suppression tactics. But now what they've done is they have awoken the bear, and we're not going back to sleep. So we will be dealing with this issue starting next week.
Excellent. So I look forward to hearing more about that as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask everyone to stay tuned for Revolutionary African Perspectives.
There's an Uncle Tom down. Everywhere I go, there's an Uncle Tom down. Uncle Tom, he got to go. When I go to church, there's an Uncle Tom down. When I go to work, there's an Uncle Tom down. Uncle Tom, oh Uncle Tom, you got to go. You got to go, you got to go. There's an Uncle Tom down. There's an Uncle Tom down. Everywhere I go. There's an Uncle Tom down. There's an Uncle Tom down. Uncle Tom, oh Uncle Tom, he got to go. You got to go. You got to go. When I go to church, and there's an Uncle Tom down. There's an Uncle Tom down. When I go to work, there's the Uncle Tom down. There's Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom. Oh, Uncle Tom. You got to go. You gotta go.